Hello. In this video, a group of Dos Pueblos High School students will address the issues and concerns of the current California public grading system. We will be individually addressing different areas of the current student mindset in order to help students gain a more realistic and less stressful educational experience. Through our research and outreach in the Dos Pueblos community, we have identified four main areas of the student mindset that are contributing to the overall issue. They are the Endgame Ideology, the student-teacher transparency dynamic, the environment and its expressions, and the grade composition. The rest of this video will be narrated by each group member specialized in one of the four areas addressed. Let's start with Endgame Ideology. Currently, the dominant student mindset is focused on obtaining grades as a primary goal. Students lock their focus in on obtaining grades with the endgame goal of getting admitted to a prestigious university or some form of rigorous higher education. As a result, the student reality of their grades becomes skewed. Quality of comprehension and learning enrichment is sacrificed in order to obtain the best grade possible. Having the unrealistic endgame goal of having near-perfect grades is disadvantageous not only to the student's education, but also to their overall health and social life. When asked how high of a priority grades are on a scale of 1 to 5, students responded with an overwhelming majority in the upper data spectrum, with 79% of responses recorded between a rating of 4 and 5. These data results were gathered from a survey of 114 Dos Pueblos students. Clearly, we can conclude from this data that students have the tendency to prioritize grades very highly. So, what is the solution to this skewed aspect of the student mindset? When interviewed about his opinion on the grading system, Dos Pueblos teacher Mr. York provided his opinion and offered some valuable insight. To quote, he said, "I would want to have a job that lets me be with people and work in a community environment, or this or that, and then start tailoring what potential occupations I want, and from there, they select the academic goals. I think that would be a healthier way of doing it because right now it's kind of a rat race. You're just racing to try to get to the best school because you hope that they will give you the best option, and then you'll be able to pick the best solution for you." Mr. York brings up a good point. We as students have a strong tendency to strive for the best grades, even before we assess their worth or meaningfulness in a broader picture. Focusing on grades constricts student goals to a very linear path, and students will often do whatever it takes, be it loss of sleep or skipping other responsibilities, in order to follow that linear path. The solution to this constricted linear mindset is opening the mind to a more variable approach. To do this, the priority needs to be shifted from grades to a more realistic and beneficial life goal. For example, if a student has found that they have a strong interest in finance, they can start to look at possible careers or jobs they would like to have further down the line in that field. Once they find something interesting or personally meaningful to them, they can then set their endgame goal to be having a career in that field. From there, the linear mindset naturally broadens up and allows for multiple paths and sub-goals to open up. Of course, it is not necessary or even realistic for all students to have their life planned ahead of them. That's not the point. The point is to allow students to see that their future life does not depend on getting specific grades, and in doing that, the stress and pressure surrounding grades is significantly lowered. In our research and outreach, we obtained an anecdote that highlights this issue from an anonymous Dos Pueblos student. To quote them, they said, "My grades are definitely my number one stressor in life. I'd be lying if I said otherwise. So, I'd say I have a lot of stress as a result of my grades. Personally, I monitor my grades like a hawk, and I spend every waking moment, or at least that's what it feels like, either studying or thinking about studying. There's just something about getting grades that aren't perfect that causes me to freak out and become extremely stressed. Ever since I was very young, I've put a lot of pressure on myself to get good grades, and at times, this pressure has literally made me sick. I'm usually very sleep deprived, like most teenagers, but in order to get good grades, I find myself staying up doing homework, revising said homework, or studying for exams in the early hours of the morning, at least 3 times each week, usually more. In addition to this, I'll sometimes be so stressed about my grades and doing well in school that I'll give myself a headache, which often escalates into a fever, nausea, or sore throat. This anecdote hits close to home and clearly displays the severe drawbacks that hyperfocus on grades can cause students. So, To summarize in an overall blanket statement, once students shift their endgame goal to a more realistic and beneficial life goal, new paths open up, and health, along with other priorities, are able to come first.
Significant issue that we have been able to identify as part of our core ideology is the student-teacher transparency dynamic. It stems from a lack of communication between students and teachers with regard to grades and assignments, with teachers not always clearly conveying assignment requirements and students not being able to understand curriculum but being too afraid to ask for help. When asked about the differences between the student and teacher mindset, Mrs. Dwyer said that it seems like from the teacher's mindset that every student thinks they deserve an A in every class, whereas from the teacher mindset, we don't see it that way. I would say I think getting a B in my IB class is a really good grade, and so I think some of the frustration some of my students have with me probably stems from that. This difference in mindset often causes students added stress, as they don't really know what they're supposed to be doing, but then get frustrated and feel pressured to do their work in a certain manner without really knowing how to go about it. Many students have busy, hectic lives, and the fear of not being able to accomplish everything on time really gets to them and makes it so that they are afraid to ask for help. A large part of the dysfunctional communication dynamic is rooted in the fact that a lot of students are afraid of failing to meet the teacher's expectations when it comes to grading assignments, but don't know how to approach the teacher with their concerns. When given a survey about how much stress and pressure students feel to get good grades in school and asked to rate their feelings on a scale from 1 to 10, an overwhelming majority of 82.4 students rated the amount of pressure that they feel to get good grades at a 7 or higher, and 84.1% of students rated the amount of stress that they feel to get good grades at a 6 or higher, with 60.1% rating it at an 8 or higher. In order to break the communication barrier, both teachers and students need to be more willing to compromise. Teachers can try to make their syllabus and class norms and expectations more clear to facilitate student understanding, but students have to be more willing to try to comprehend material to the best of their ability, participate in class, and ask questions for clarification. When interviewed about this subject, Ms. Happel explained that she outlines the work in a list that students must complete in and outside of class each week, and that she always gets good feedback from students and parents about how much they appreciate having the list and knowing what's being expected and having everything laid out at the beginning of the week. That is the type of thing that would give students clarity, allow teachers to convey their expectations, and facilitate a more direct line of communication between students and teachers. Neither party is to blame for a lack of transparency dynamic between students and teachers, but there are certainly things that both teachers and students can do to establish a clear line of communication, which would reduce the amount of stress and pressure that students feel when it comes to grades.
Our third major issue has to do with the environments that students face and how that affects their outlook on school. The problem focuses specifically on the expressions that students have towards academia and the dispositional factors of their environment which lead them to these pre-composed notions of the education system. So rather than trying to enforce a certain expression to fix the problem, we focused on subduing the origination of the problem so that this issue does not continue to recur. The multitude of environmental factors that students face is innumerable, so we couldn't focus on fixing each individual circumstance. So instead we focused on an approach which students should view this issue. We know this problem is widespread throughout our school, as showcased within our data. A majority of roughly 60% of current Dos Pueblos students face weekly mental and physical health problems due to stress caused by the current grading system. A large portion of this is representative of the negative environments the students are forced to deal with. Mr. Stewart highlights a major aspect of this issue with his quote, "I say the majority of students are more interested in learning, but grades are like a constant motivator or a threat factor." This shows how students either deal with their personal environment and focus on getting the best grade they can, or condemn the system and reject it, losing the opportunity at a decent outcome. Here's a personal anecdote from a fellow DP student. "I wouldn't say that my environment for learning has been perfect. There are lots of things that I and many other students have to overcome in order to learn. Of course, in a perfect world, every student's home life wouldn't interfere with their school life, and they would be able to get the help they need, but life isn't that perfect. These factors definitely put me at a disadvantage to some other students who have time, money, and resources to support their education. I think that you need to look at it from a logical perspective. There are both disadvantages and advantages to each position of students. Sure, the student with the resources will have a better chance of getting the perfect grade, but as they progress throughout life, they won't have the experience of having to struggle as hard as other peers. And the students who have the off chance of having negative environments won't get the perfect grade, but they will be able to deal with stress later on with more ease than someone with resources. There will always be exceptions, but to each side there is their advantages and disadvantages. Specifically concerning students with negative environments, the key is to make the best out of it. Just because your environment is not perfect for school, doesn't mean you have to reject school. What we can take away from this issue is to focus on the positive outcomes. Whether due to your dispositional factors you reject education or accept your position for what it is, school is going to be a constant. If you reject the system, that decision is eventually going to catch up to you and stab you in the back. You shouldn't think that due to your environment it's reasonable to condemn the system. That choice doesn't help anyone and hurts you in the long run. Realizing that school is the confines that you have to operate within shows us that doing the best with your current means is the correct path to choose.
The last issue we found was actually the way in which grades are put together, known as the grade composition. There is no exact manner in which grades are split up, but they typically fall into the categories of classwork, participation, homework, and tests and quizzes. These groups give a basic overview on how the student may have performed in any given class. However, the standards for these categories often change between teacher, depending on the needs for the class or the teacher's personal ideals. This can cause confusion for students trying to fit to the standards of grades for the many number of classes they may have. This can cause students to obsess over appealing to their teacher's values rather than actually focusing on the material being taught in class. Along with that, grades of course cannot accurately measure intelligence. It rather gives a general summary of what a teacher thinks a student's total comprehension and effort put into the class was. Engineering teacher, Mr. Stewart, perfectly sums up this aspect of the grading system, saying, grades get a certain aspect of intelligence, but clearly they're not a metric of intelligence because intelligence itself is very nebulous. Meaning, while of course grades are able to analyze portions of a student's intelligence of the curriculum they are taught, they should not be used to determine the overall intelligence of a student because intelligence is something so broad and cannot really be forced into one division. Nonetheless, these grades are often used to judge a student's intellect and sometimes even their character. Someone with straight A's is typically seen as smarter and is praised rather than someone with C's, D's, and F's, even though those grades do not always perfectly depict a student's comprehension of any given subject. The student with straight A's could have just easily figured out a way to cheat the system and may not even know any of the material being taught throughout the class, while the student with not so perfect grades could understand the material well, but could just not reproduce it in a manner that fits well into the established grading system. When asked on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, how well students thought grades represented intelligence, 42.2% said over a 4, showing that students have a false notion on what their grades mean, thinking it measures their intelligence and self-worth rather than, what it is, a summary made by a teacher of their overall performance in their class. Students need to shift their mindset over from trying to receive perfect marks in a system that frequently is unable to properly measure a student's knowledge of information, and focus more on trying to learn the material being taught in their class. Having straight A's does not necessarily mean someone is a genius, and definitely does not secure a better future over someone who has below average grades.
So now that you've heard from each group member, let's quickly go over each of the issues that have been discussed in this video. First, we have Endgame Ideology, in which students shift attention away from single grades to a more realistic and beneficial life goal. Second, we have the student-teacher transparency dynamic, which is negatively affected by miscommunication between teachers and students, leading to increased stress levels and feelings of pressure. Third, we have the environment and its expressions, which encapsulates the dispositional factors which lead to diverging aspects of students. And finally, grade composition, which requires student understanding that grades are not an accurate assessment of overall intelligence, but rather an assessment of class achievement. To sum up all of these issues into one main thesis, shifting the student mindset while facilitating transparent communication will help to create a positive outlook realistically defined within identified key grade compositional factors. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please comment below.